Rain fell over the city like it was trying to wash away secrets that had already been carved too deeply into time. The streets shimmered under the glow of distant streetlights, each reflection distorted like broken memories refusing to align properly. Inside a small apartment far away from the world of luxury towers and glass penthouses, a woman stood frozen behind a door she was no longer sure she should ever open again. Her name was Lena Carter, and tonight, her entire past was standing on the other side of that fragile barrier. The air inside the apartment felt heavier than usual, as if even silence was holding its breath. Lena's hand hovered near the door handle, trembling slightly. Not from fear alone, but from something deeper, something closer to emotional exhaustion. For years, she had built walls around herself, walls made of anger, survival, and unanswered questions. But tonight, those walls felt thinner than paper. Outside stood Ethan Cross. A billionaire known across industries, countries, and headlines. A man whose name was associated with power, control, and intelligence. But none of that mattered in this moment. Because the man standing outside her door did not look like someone who controlled empires. He looked like someone standing at the edge of something collapsing inside him, and Lena knew why he was here. Or at least, she thought she did. But the truth was already beginning to shift. Because moments before he arrived, she had received something she could not explain. A message. Unknown. Untraceable. And it said one thing that would destabilize everything she believed: don't trust Ethan Cross. Ethan stood outside the door without moving, as if any movement might destroy the fragile tension holding everything together. The rain soaked through his expensive clothing, but he did not react to it. For the first time in years, Ethan Cross looked like a man stripped of control. Not financially. Not socially. But emotionally. Inside, Lena stared at him through the thin barrier separating them. Every memory she had tried to bury came back all at once: her father collapsing in his office, the sudden financial ruin of the Carter empire, the whispers in newspapers, the silent breakdown of her mother behind closed doors. And somehow, all of it pointed back to the man outside. Lena finally opened the door. The sound of it creaking felt louder than thunder. They stood facing each other in silence, seconds stretched into something unbearable. Lena's voice finally broke through the stillness. "Say one reason I shouldn't hate you right now." Her tone wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was tired. The kind of tired that comes after years of fighting battles no one else can see. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. That silence wasn't hesitation, it was collapse. Because every explanation he had prepared suddenly felt useless in front of her pain, Lena stepped forward slightly, her eyes trembling with controlled anger. "You destroyed my family," she said softly. "My father died believing he failed. My mother lost everything. And you became richer than ever." Ethan lowered his gaze, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I didn't know everything." That sentence shattered something inside her instantly, because it sounded too familiar, too rehearsed, too safe. Lena laughed, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief, pain, and betrayal collapsing into one sound. "That's what they always say," she whispered, and somewhere far away, someone was smiling, because Victor Hale had just started winning. In a dark private office overlooking the city skyline, Victor Hale sat surrounded by screens showing fragments of Lena's emotional world. He wasn't watching events. He was controlling interpretations of events. To him, truth was not something discovered. It was something constructed. He leaned forward slightly, watching Lena's expression through a live feed. "She's reacting perfectly," he said quietly, almost amused. "Still unstable. Still easy to redirect." An assistant asked carefully, "Should we continue sending her the documents?" Victor shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Documents are predictable. Facts can be challenged." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "Now we feed her emotions." That sentence changed everything, because Victor understood something most people never realize. People don't break because of lies, They break because they stop trusting their own judgment, and Lena Carter was now entering that exact psychological state. Victor leaned back and smiled faintly. "This is not investigation," he whispered. "This is reconstruction of belief." Ethan sat alone in a glass office high above the city. Screens, documents, and encrypted files surrounded him, but nothing was consistent. Every time he verified a detail, it changed. Every time he traced a source, it disappeared. It was not chaos, it was controlled instability. Ethan leaned forward, pressing his fingers against the desk. "This isn't random," he muttered. "Someone is rewriting the narrative in real time." For the first time in his career, Ethan Cross felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Not anger. But limitation. He was used to controlling markets, negotiations, outcomes. But here, someone was controlling perception itself, and worse, every message Lena received was pushing her further away from him in a perfectly calibrated emotional sequence. It was not just manipulation, it was orchestration. Lena sat alone in her apartment again, but now the silence felt different. Heavier. Distorted. Like reality itself was no longer stable. Another file arrived. This one showed Ethan smiling during the Carter acquisition signing. Shaking hands. Celebrating. The image was clean. Too clean. Almost professionally staged. "No," she whispered. "This can't be real." But her mind didn't reject it, it absorbed it, and that was worse. Another message followed instantly: "He never cared about your father." That sentence did not feel like information, it felt like finality. Lena collapsed onto her bed, covering her ears as if sound itself was attacking her. Her entire belief system fractured in real time, and somewhere behind all of it, Victor Hale was carefully adjusting the pressure, like a surgeon. Ethan discovered the truth at the worst possible moment. Victor was preparing a legal framework to implicate Lena in corporate corruption she had nothing to do with. A silent destruction strategy designed to erase her permanently from the industry. Ethan stood up immediately. "No time for court battles," he said coldly. His assistant tried to stop him. "If you step in directly, you'll lose everything." Ethan paused, then said something that changed everything: "I already have." And walked out. Lena sat in complete silence after the press conference ended, her phone still glowing faintly in her hand as the world continued moving outside her window like nothing had changed. But inside her, everything had changed. The image of Ethan standing at that podium refused to leave her mind. Not his confession, but his expression. There was no pride in it. No defense. No attempt to save himself. Only surrender. Victor's message arrived again almost instantly, like he was watching her breath patterns through the screen. He confessed everything, it read. But this time, the words didn't land the same way. They felt hollow. Detached. Like someone trying too hard to make a puzzle fit a shape it no longer belonged to. Lena slowly placed the phone down on the table as her hands trembled uncontrollably, not from anger anymore, but from confusion she could no longer suppress, because something didn't add up. Ethan Cross, the man who destroyed competitors without hesitation, who controlled global negotiations without blinking, who never lost a public battle, had just erased himself without resistance. That wasn't guilt behavior. That was sacrifice behavior. And sacrifice meant intention. Purpose. Protection. And that meant everything she believed might be wrong. For the first time, Lena whispered a question into the empty room, her voice barely audible. "What are you trying to protect me from, Ethan?" And in that moment, something inside her belief system began to crack, not fully break yet, but shift just enough to create doubt Victor could no longer fully control. Ethan sat alone in what used to be the highest floor of his corporate empire. Now it was empty. No assistants. No meetings. No movement. Only the sound of wind slipping through glass corridors that once held the weight of global decisions. The silence was so heavy it felt physical, like the building itself was mourning what it had lost. His phone had stopped ringing hours ago. News channels had already moved on to the next scandal. The world had officially finished consuming his downfall. But Ethan didn't move. He simply sat there, staring at a single unread message that he knew was from Lena but hadn't opened yet. Because opening it would mean confronting the only thing he still couldn't control, her perception of him. His assistant's voice echoed softly through a final call before disconnecting. Was it worth it? The question lingered even after the line went dead. Ethan leaned back slowly, closing his eyes for a moment that felt heavier than everything that had happened before. Then he answered no one in particular, speaking into the empty air. If she is safe. Then yes. But even as he said it, something inside him tightened. Because sacrifice always comes with a cost. And his cost wasn't money. It wasn't power. It was being remembered as a villain by the only person who now mattered to him. And that thought hurt more than losing the empire ever could. For the first time in years, Ethan Cross didn't look like a man who lost a company. He looked like a man who chose silence over being understood. And that silence was irreversible. Victor Hale sat in his dim office, watching Lena through fragmented data feeds that were starting to behave unpredictably. Something was changing. Her emotional responses were no longer linear. The pattern he had carefully constructed was beginning to distort. That wasn't supposed to happen. He frowned slightly as he realized something uncomfortable. Lena was thinking again. Not reacting. Not absorbing. Thinking. And thinking was dangerous because it meant interpretation had returned. He leaned forward, adjusting the system manually. She's slipping, he said quietly. Increase emotional pressure. A new file was sent immediately. This time, a video. Ethan Cross allegedly confessing to intentional manipulation, control, and emotional interference. It was designed to be absolute. Final. Irrefutable. The kind of evidence that removes doubt completely and replaces it with certainty. Lena watched the video without blinking. But instead of collapsing like before, she remained still. Too still. Her expression didn't break immediately. It hovered between acceptance and resistance. Then slowly, something unexpected happened. She didn't cry. She questioned it. For the first time, she didn't absorb the truth presented to her. She tested it, and that terrified Victor more than any emotional breakdown ever could. Rain returned to the city again, as if the world itself refused to move forward without one final confrontation. Lena walked through the airport slowly, dragging a suitcase behind her, but it felt heavier than anything physical. Each step was a decision. Each breath was a goodbye she wasn't fully ready to accept but no longer wanted to fight against. Her flight was boarding. The announcement echoed overhead, distant and mechanical. People moved around her, unaware of the war happening silently inside her mind. She had already chosen to leave. Not because she was certain, but because uncertainty had become unbearable. And sometimes, escape feels safer than understanding. Then she saw him. Ethan, standing at a distance where he could see her but not reach her. He wasn't moving toward her. He wasn't stopping her. He was simply there. Present. Still. Almost like he knew this moment wasn't about control anymore, it was about choice. Lena froze, her grip tightening around her suitcase handle. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Why didn't you stop me?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before answering softly, "Because I finally love you enough to let you hate me in peace." The words didn't comfort her. They shattered her. Because they weren't an excuse. They were surrender. And surrender from someone like Ethan meant something deeper than she was prepared to understand. For a moment, neither of them moved. The entire airport noise faded into the background. It was just the two of them standing in a silence filled with everything they had never said. Victor Hale's empire finally collapsed under internal exposure. Hidden logs. Manipulated evidence trails. Psychological interference patterns. Everything he built to control perception unraveled once inconsistencies were traced back to their origin point. Lena stood in the aftermath of it all, reading the truth slowly, piece by piece. Not dramatically. Not emotionally at first. Just quietly. Like someone trying to understand a language she had been forced to speak fluently without ever learning it properly. And as the truth unfolded, her anger didn't return, something else did, grief, because she realized she had been wrong, but not entirely. Ethan had been involved in the collapse of her family's world. But not in the way she thought. Not as the architect of destruction. But as someone who had unknowingly inherited a corrupted system. She found him later in an empty studio space. No guards. No luxury. No identity left. Just him. Sitting in silence. When she entered, neither of them spoke immediately. The space between them was no longer hostile. It was exhausted. Lena finally broke the silence. I don't know how to do this anymore. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired in a way that came after surviving too much emotional war. Ethan nodded slightly, his expression softening for the first time in a long time. Me neither, he said quietly, and that was it, no dramatic apology. No confession, no final emotional explosion, just two people who had been broken in different ways trying to understand what remained after everything collapsed. Lena slowly reached for his hand. Not as forgiveness. Not as romance. But as confirmation that she was no longer standing alone in the aftermath of everything that had been done to them. Ethan didn't move first. He let her choose it. And when their hands finally touched, it wasn't victory, it was survival.